The chill of a Scottish winter clung to the stones of Holyrood Palace in early 1567, seeping into the very bones of those who dwelled within its walls. A dampness, both literal and metaphorical, permeated the air, mirroring the unease that festered beneath the surface of the royal court. Mary, Queen of Scots, moved through the draughty halls, her presence a beacon of light against the gloom. She was a young woman, barely 24, yet burdened with the weight of a kingdom and the complexities of a turbulent political landscape. Heavily pregnant, she carried not only the future heir to the Scottish throne but also the hopes and anxieties of a nation. At first glance, life at Holyrood appeared stable, almost idyllic. Courtiers bustled about their duties, musicians filled the air with delicate melodies, and the scent of roasted meats wafted from the kitchens. Mary, ever conscious of her public image, made a point of displaying affection towards her husband, Lord Darnley. Their public appearances were carefully orchestrated to project an image of marital harmony and royal strength. They would often be seen strolling together in the palace gardens, Darnley handsome and charming, at her side, Mary radiant and regal in her gowns. They attended Mass together in the chapel, their voices joining in prayer, a seemingly united front before God and their people. However, behind the facade of royal bliss, a web of intrigue and discontent was tightening around Mary. Her marriage to Darnley, once celebrated as a love match, had quickly soured. His volatile temper, his insatiable ambition, and his penchant for drunken revelry had alienated him from the Scottish nobility and strained their relationship to breaking point. He demanded power and influence that Mary was unwilling to grant, creating a constant undercurrent of tension between them. Darnley resented Mary's authority and sought ways to undermine her, often conspiring with disgruntled lords who saw an opportunity to advance their own agendas. Mary found herself increasingly isolated, surrounded by advisors whose loyalty was questionable and a husband who had become her adversary. She longed for someone she could trust, someone who would offer her genuine counsel and unwavering support. In this climate of suspicion and betrayal, she turned to her private secretary, David Rizzio. Rizzio, an Italian musician and courtier, had quickly risen in Mary's favor. His intelligence, his discretion, and his unwavering devotion to the Queen made him an invaluable confidant. He advised her on matters of state, assisted her with correspondence, and provided her with companionship in a court where genuine friendship was a rare commodity. Rizzio's influence over Mary, however, became a source of intense jealousy and resentment among the Scottish nobles. They viewed him as a foreign upstart, an outsider who had unduly gained the Queen's ear. His humble origins and his perceived closeness to Mary fueled their xenophobia and their suspicion. Whispers began to circulate about the nature of their relationship, malicious rumors suggesting that their bond was more than just professional. These rumors, whether true or not, served to further damage Mary's reputation and to isolate her from her own nobility. The political landscape of Scotland in 1567 was a treacherous minefield. Religious tensions between Catholics and Protestants were simmering, threatening to erupt into open conflict. The Scottish lords were divided into factions, each vying for power and influence. England, under the watchful eye of Queen Elizabeth I, loomed to the south, a powerful and often meddling neighbor. Mary, a Catholic queen in a largely Protestant country, faced constant suspicion and scrutiny. Her claim to the English throne as a descendant of Henry VIII's sister made her a potential threat to Elizabeth and a focal point for Catholic dissenters in England. The atmosphere at Holyrood was thick with unspoken anxieties. The nobles eyed each other with suspicion, their alliances shifting like sand in the wind. Darnley, increasingly erratic and desperate, plotted with anyone who would listen to his grievances. Rizzio, aware of the danger he faced, remained steadfastly loyal to Mary, but his presence only served to inflame the situation further. Mary, pregnant and vulnerable, navigated this treacherous terrain with a mixture of determination and trepidation. She knew that one wrong move could cost her everything: her throne, her freedom, and even her life. Mary received ambassadors in the Great Hall, the tapestries depicting scenes of Scottish valor seeming to mock the present disunity. She negotiated treaties, attempting to secure alliances and maintain peace, her every word scrutinized by watchful eyes. She held audiences with petitioners, listening to their grievances and dispensing justice, always aware of the delicate balance between fairness and political expediency. The weight of her crown pressed heavily upon her brow. Evenings offered little respite, while musicians played and courtiers danced in the Queen's presence chamber. Plotting continued in shadowed corners. Mary would retire to her private chambers, seeking solace in needlework or reading. But the unease followed her. The walls seemed to have ears, the very stones whispering secrets and betrayals. She longed for a moment of true peace, a space free from the constant political machinations, but such a sanctuary seemed unattainable. Darnley's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would swing from fits of maudlin self-pity to outbursts of violent rage, often fueled by drink. He accused Mary of infidelity, of favoring Rizzio over him, and of plotting against him. His accusations, though often baseless, further eroded his standing with the nobility and deepened the chasm between him and Mary. She tried to reason with him, to soothe his insecurities, but her efforts were met with resentment and suspicion. He saw her kindness as condescension, her attempts at reconciliation as manipulations. Rizzio, sensing the escalating danger, urged Mary to take precautions. He advised her to strengthen her guard, to be wary of those who sought access to her, and to trust only those who had proven their loyalty. He became her shield, protecting her from the intrigues of the court, and offering her a safe space to confide her fears. But his very presence was a lightning rod, attracting the animosity of those who sought to undermine Mary's authority. One evening, as Mary sat in her private chamber, discussing matters of state with Rizzio, a shadow fell across the doorway. It was Lord Ruthven, a gaunt and menacing figure, his eyes burning with a cold intensity. He was one of Darnley's closest confidants and a key player in the growing conspiracy against Mary. He stood there, blocking the entrance, his presence a palpable threat. He bowed stiffly, his eyes never leaving Mary's. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "I have urgent news for the king." Mary felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that Ruthven's presence could only mean trouble. She glanced at Rizzio, who stood protectively beside her, his face pale but resolute. "The king is indisposed," Mary replied, her voice calm but firm. "You may deliver your message to me." Ruthven's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," he said, "this matter is for the king's ears alone." He stepped further into the room, his hand moving towards the hilt of his sword. Mary knew that she was trapped. The carefully constructed facade of stability at Holyrood Palace was about to shatter, unleashing a storm of violence and betrayal that would forever alter the course of her reign. The subtle tensions had reached a breaking point, and the whispers of opposition were about to become a deafening roar. But is Mary as innocent as she seems? Uncover the secrets and scandals of the Scottish court by subscribing to our channel and liking this video. Don't miss part 2 where the drama unfolds. The fragile peace within Holyrood Palace shattered on the evening of March 9, 1566. Lord Darnley, consumed by a volatile mix of jealousy, ambition and resentment towards the increasing influence of David Rizzio over Mary, Queen of Scots, had secretly forged a dark alliance. Darnley's fragile ego had been bruised by whispers of his irrelevance, fueled by the Queen's apparent preference for the company and counsel of her Italian secretary. These poisonous doubts were expertly nurtured by a cabal of Protestant lords, men like Lord Ruthven, whose own ambitions and religious convictions aligned with the opportunity to destabilize Mary's rule. They saw in Darnley a malleable tool, a king in name only, easily manipulated to serve their purposes. Under the cloak of a starless night, the conspirators, armed and masked, infiltrated Holyrood Palace. Their target, David Rizzio. Their motive, to eliminate the perceived threat to their power, and to force Mary, pregnant with the future heir to the Scottish throne, to bend to their will. The plan was audacious, bordering on treason, but the conspirators were blinded by their lust for control. Mary, heavily pregnant, was at supper in a small private chamber with the Countess of Argyll, her physician and David Rizzio. The atmosphere was relaxed, a momentary respite from the ceaseless political machinations that defined her reign. Laughter and conversation filled the room, a brief illusion of normalcy in the heart of the viper's nest that was the Scottish court. Suddenly, the tranquility was shattered. Lord Darnley burst into the room, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and something akin to fear behind him. The masked figures of the conspirators surged into the small space, their drawn swords glinting menacingly in the candlelight. Mary rose to her feet, her eyes wide with alarm. "Darnley, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempts at composure. Darnley, seemingly unable to meet his wife's gaze, stammered, "These men, they have come to speak with Rizzio." Lord Ruthven, his face pale and gaunt even behind his mask, stepped forward. "We have matters of state to discuss with the Italian," he stated, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. Rizzio, understanding the gravity of the situation, instinctively moved closer to Mary, seeking her protection. He grasped at her gown, his eyes pleading. "Your Majesty, protect me," he cried. But Mary was powerless. The conspirators surged forward, their swords drawn. They ripped Rizzio from her side, ignoring her pleas and protests. The small chamber became a scene of unimaginable violence. The clash of steel, the desperate cries of Rizzio, and the horrified screams of Mary and the Countess of Argyll filled the air. The conspirators, driven by a frenzy of hatred and fear, stabbed Rizzio repeatedly. He was dragged from the supper room into the outer chamber, where the brutal assault continued. In the end, he lay dead, a mangled heap of flesh and blood, a testament to the ruthlessness of the Scottish nobility. Mary, witnessing the horrific murder of her friend and confidant, was left traumatized and enraged. The brutal act, carried out in her presence and while she was pregnant, was a profound violation, a direct assault on her authority and her person. The psychological impact was devastating. As the conspirators retreated, leaving behind the bloody carnage, Mary was left to grapple with the enormity of what had transpired. She was a queen, yet she had been utterly powerless to protect her friend. She was pregnant, yet she had been subjected to unimaginable violence. She was surrounded by enemies, men who would stop at nothing to seize power. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, Mary was effectively a prisoner within Holyrood Palace. Darnley, now seemingly repentant and fearful of the consequences of his actions, remained by her side, a pathetic figure caught in a web of his own making. The conspirators, emboldened by their success, controlled the palace and dictated the terms of Mary's confinement. But Mary was not one to be easily subdued. Beneath her grief and shock, a steely resolve began to form. She knew that she could not afford to remain passive. Her survival and the future of her unborn child depended on her ability to regain control of the situation. She began to subtly manipulate Darnley, playing on his weaknesses and insecurities. She feigned forgiveness, appealing to his vanity and his desire for her affection. She reminded him of their shared destiny, of their son who would one day inherit the throne of Scotland. Darnley, desperate for her approval and terrified of being abandoned by his co-conspirators, proved to be remarkably susceptible to Mary's charms. He confessed his role in the murder of Rizzio, revealing the names of the other conspirators and their motives. Mary listened patiently, her mind racing. She realized that Darnley, for all his faults, was her only chance of escape. She subtly turned him against his former allies, painting them as power-hungry traitors who had used him for their own selfish purposes. Slowly, painstakingly, Mary began to regain Darnley's trust. She convinced him that they were both in danger, that the conspirators could turn on him at any moment. She proposed a plan. They would escape from Holyrood Palace together and seek refuge in Dunbar Castle, where they could rally her loyal supporters and reclaim her throne. Darnley, now completely under Mary's spell, readily agreed. He helped her to orchestrate their escape, deceiving the guards and slipping out of the palace under the cover of darkness. Their escape was daring and fraught with risk. They rode through the night, pursued by the conspirators, their lives hanging in the balance. But Mary, fueled by her determination and her instinct for survival, pressed on. Finally, they reached Dunbar Castle, a stronghold loyal to Mary. She was greeted with open arms by her supporters, who rallied to her cause. The news of her escape and the murder of Rizzio spread quickly throughout Scotland, galvanizing support for the Queen. Mary, now free from her confinement, wasted no time in consolidating her power. She issued proclamations denouncing the conspirators as traitors and calling on her loyal subjects to rise up against them. She gathered an army and marched on Edinburgh, determined to reclaim her capital and avenge the murder of her friend. The conspirators, caught off guard by Mary's swift and decisive action, were unable to mount an effective defense. They were quickly routed and forced to flee the country. Mary triumphantly re-entered Edinburgh, her authority restored. However, the murder of Rizzio had irrevocably damaged her reputation. Public suspicion began to grow, fueled by rumors and innuendo. The people of Scotland, already wary of their Catholic queen, began to question her judgment and her motives. The seeds of distrust had been sown, and they would continue to fester and grow in the months to come. The murder of Lord Darnley. On the night of February 9, 1567, Kirk O'Field, the residence where Darnley was recuperating from an illness, was destroyed by a massive explosion. The building was reduced to rubble, and Darnley's body was found in the gardens, strangled. The news of Darnley's murder sent shockwaves throughout Scotland. The circumstances surrounding his death were suspicious, to say the least. The explosion, the strangulation, the lack of any clear motive all pointed to a carefully planned assassination. Public outrage was intense. Suspicion immediately fell on Mary and her rumored lover, the Earl of Bothwell. Bothwell, a powerful and ambitious nobleman, had been a close confidant of Mary's since the Rizzio affair. Whispers of their illicit relationship had been circulating for months, fueling the growing discontent with Mary's rule. The speed with which Bothwell was put on trial only served to deepen the suspicion. The trial was a sham, a mockery of justice. No witnesses were called, no evidence was presented, and Bothwell was quickly acquitted. The perception that Mary had colluded in the murder of her husband was now widespread. The Scottish people, already disillusioned with their queen, were now convinced of her guilt. Then, just 3 months after Darnley's death, Mary made a decision that would seal her fate. She married the Earl of Bothwell. The marriage was a political disaster. It confirmed the worst suspicions about Mary and Bothwell, and it ignited a rebellion among the Scottish lords. They raised an army against them, determined to depose Mary and avenge the murder of Darnley. The two sides met at the Battle of Carberry Hill. Mary's forces were outnumbered and outmatched. The battle was short and decisive. Mary's army was routed, and she was forced to surrender to the rebel lords. The marriage to Bothwell, meant to consolidate power, had instead stripped Mary of all influence. The lords had acted with speed, taking advantage of widespread resentment and uniting against her. The French and Catholic factions that had once supported her were fractured, leaving her vulnerable. She had lost control, and the consequences were catastrophic. Imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle, Mary was stripped of her crown and forced to confront the consequences of her choices. Each stone wall and barred window served as a constant reminder of her diminishing power and increasing isolation. Her enemies circled, weaving narratives of conspiracy and betrayal, solidifying their control over Scotland and her infant son. She was but a shadow of the queen she once was. The future lay shrouded in uncertainty. Mary, now free from the confines of Holyrood, orchestrated a swift and decisive return to power. Dunbar Castle, a fortress loyal to the crown, became the staging ground for her counter-offensive. With the aid of the Earl of Bothwell and other sympathetic nobles, she rapidly amassed a force sufficient to challenge the rebel lords who had dared to threaten her sovereignty. The speed and efficiency of her actions demonstrated a ruthless pragmatism that belied the image of a vulnerable queen. Edinburgh, once held by her enemies, was retaken with minimal bloodshed, a testament to the fear and respect she still commanded, or perhaps a reflection of the self-preservation instincts of a populace weary of conflict. However, the victory was Pyrrhic. The stain of Rizzio's murder clung to Mary, a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. Whispers of complicity, of a queen entangled in foreign intrigues and susceptible to undue influence, continued to circulate, poisoning the well of public opinion. The Scottish people, fiercely independent and deeply suspicious of outsiders, were uneasy with the Italian secretary's perceived power, and his violent end only served to amplify their anxieties. Mary's attempts to project an image of strength and resolve were undermined by the persistent rumors and insinuations that painted her as a woman controlled by her emotions and easily manipulated by those around her. The death of Lord Darnley, Kirk O'Field, the residence where Darnley was convalescing from illness, was rocked by a violent explosion in the dead of night. The building was reduced to rubble, a grim testament to the destructive power of the blast. Yet amidst the devastation, Darnley's body was discovered in the gardens, not crushed by the debris, but strangled. The news of Darnley's murder sent shockwaves throughout Scotland and beyond. The circumstances were undeniably suspicious, reeking of conspiracy and foul play. Public outrage was immediate and visceral, fueled by the inherent drama of a young king murdered in such a brutal and inexplicable manner. Suspicion, like a venomous serpent, immediately turned towards Mary. Her strained relationship with Darnley, the recent upheaval surrounding Rizzio's death, and the pervasive rumors of her growing intimacy with the Earl of Bothwell, all combined to paint a damning picture in the eyes of the public. The finger of blame, already pointing in Mary's direction, was further emboldened by the actions of the Earl of Bothwell. With remarkable speed, he was brought to trial for Darnley's murder. However, the proceedings were widely regarded as a farce, a thinly veiled attempt to exonerate a man who was clearly implicated in the crime. The lack of credible evidence presented against Bothwell, the intimidation of witnesses, and the blatant bias of the court all contributed to the perception that the trial was rigged from the start. The inevitable acquittal only served to inflame public anger and reinforce the belief that Mary was somehow involved in her husband's death and was now shielding his killer. The situation spiraled further into chaos when, a mere 3 months after Darnley's murder, Mary married the Earl of Bothwell. The marriage, conducted with indecent haste and amidst widespread condemnation, was a monumental miscalculation that irrevocably damaged Mary's reputation and triggered a full-blown rebellion. To the Scottish people, already reeling from the shock of Darnley's death and the perceived injustice of Bothwell's acquittal, the marriage was an act of blatant defiance, a slap in the face to their sense of morality and justice. It confirmed their worst suspicions about Mary's involvement in the murder, and fueled the growing belief that she was unfit to rule. The Scottish lords, already chafing under Mary's rule and emboldened by the public outrage, seized the opportunity to challenge her authority. A confederacy of nobles, including some who had previously supported her, raised an army to depose her and avenge Darnley's death. The banners of rebellion were unfurled, and the kingdom plunged into civil war. Mary and Bothwell, isolated and increasingly desperate, attempted to rally their loyal supporters, but the tide of public opinion had turned decisively against them. The inevitable clash came at Carberry Hill, a strategically important location overlooking Edinburgh. The two armies faced each other across the field, a grim tableau of national division. Mary, dressed in battle armor, attempted to rally her troops, but her words fell on deaf ears. Her army, demoralized and outnumbered, was no match for the determined forces of the rebel lords. Desertions were rampant, and the soldiers lacked the will to fight for a queen who had become a symbol of scandal and betrayal. The Battle of Carberry Hill was less a battle and more a rout. Mary's forces, lacking leadership and conviction, crumbled before the rebel advance. Recognizing the futility of further resistance, Mary made the agonizing decision to surrender. She was taken into custody by the rebel lords, stripped of her authority, and imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle, a forbidding island fortress that would become her prison. Within the cold, damp walls of Loch Leven, Mary faced the bitter consequences of her actions and the relentless machinations of her enemies. The rebel lords, determined to consolidate their power and secure the future of Scotland, pressured her to abdicate the throne in favor of her infant son, James VI. Faced with the overwhelming odds and the threat of further violence, Mary reluctantly agreed. She signed the instrument of abdication, effectively relinquishing her claim to the Scottish throne and paving the way for a regency led by her half-brother, the Earl of Moray. The abdication was a crushing blow, a symbolic defeat that marked the end of Mary's reign as Queen of Scots. She was now a prisoner in her own kingdom, stripped of her power, her dignity, and her freedom. Yet, even in the depths of despair, Mary refused to be broken. She harbored a burning desire to regain her throne and clear her name, a determination that would fuel her future actions and shape the course of her life. Despite the heavy guard and the isolation of Loch Leven, Mary never lost hope. She meticulously planned her escape, cultivating alliances with sympathetic guards and relying on her innate charm and persuasive abilities to win over those who had access to her. After months of careful planning and meticulous preparation, Mary finally managed to escape from Loch Leven with the help of George Douglas, brother of Sir William Douglas, the castle's owner, and Willie Douglas, a young orphaned relation to the Douglases who lived at the castle. The escape was daring and audacious, a testament to Mary's unwavering resolve and her ability to inspire loyalty in those around her. Once free, Mary rallied her remaining supporters, those who still believed in her and were willing to fight for her cause. She raised a new army, and once again challenged the authority of the regency. The brief resurgence of her power sparked renewed hope among her loyal followers, and reignited the flames of civil war. However, the momentum was short-lived. The forces loyal to the regency, led by the Earl of Moray, confronted Mary's army at the Battle of Langside. The battle was decisive. Mary's army, hastily assembled and poorly equipped, was decisively defeated. The defeat at Langside marked the final collapse of Mary's hopes for regaining her throne in Scotland. Recognizing that her position in Scotland was untenable, Mary made the fateful decision to flee to England, seeking protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. She believed that Elizabeth, as a fellow sovereign, would offer her sanctuary and support, helping her to reclaim her rightful place on the Scottish throne. She crossed the border, leaving behind a kingdom torn by strife, and a reputation tarnished by scandal, hoping to find refuge and justice in the arms of her powerful cousin. Mary's arrival in England was met with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Elizabeth, ever the astute politician, recognized the potential threat that Mary posed to her own reign. Mary was a Catholic queen with a strong claim to the English throne, and her presence in England could serve as a rallying point for Catholic dissidents who sought to overthrow Elizabeth and replace her with a Catholic monarch. Despite her initial hopes for sanctuary, Mary quickly realized that she was not a welcome guest in England. Elizabeth, wary of the political implications of supporting Mary, refused to grant her an audience or offer her any concrete assistance. Instead, she placed Mary under house arrest, confining her to a series of castles and manors under the watchful eyes of loyal English guardians. Mary, Queen of Scots, had arrived in England seeking refuge, but she found only imprisonment. Her hopes for a swift restoration to her throne were dashed, replaced by the grim reality of captivity. The episode ends with Mary, confined within the walls of an English castle, her future uncertain, her fate hanging in the balance. She gazes out of the window, a figure of regal bearing but diminished circumstances, contemplating the battles yet to come, the political intrigues that would shape her destiny, and the question that would forever haunt her legacy. Was she truly involved in the death of Lord Darnley, or was she merely a victim of circumstance, a pawn in a deadly game of thrones? The camera lingers on her face, a mask of stoicism and determination, leaving the audience to ponder the complexities of her character and the enduring mystery of her past. Mary was imprisoned within the formidable walls of Loch Leven Castle, a fortress situated on an island in the middle of a loch. The castle, a damp and dreary place, offered little comfort to the queen who had once commanded palaces. The air was thick with the stench of mildew, and the stone walls seemed to press in on her, a constant reminder of her reduced circumstances. Her every move was watched, her conversations monitored, and her freedom curtailed. The lords who had once bowed before her now controlled her destiny, and the sting of their betrayal was a constant ache in her heart. They presented her with a document of abdication, a formal renunciation of her throne. For days Mary refused. She argued, she pleaded, she raged against the injustice of it all. She claimed her divine right, the sacred anointment that set her apart. She reminded them of her lineage, of the blood of kings that flowed in her veins. But her words fell on deaf ears. The lords were unmoved. They had tasted power and they were not willing to relinquish it. They threatened her, hinting at worse fates should she continue to resist. They spoke of her safety, ironically, suggesting that her abdication was the only way to ensure her survival. The pressure was relentless, a suffocating blanket of coercion. Finally, broken and despairing, Mary relented. She signed the instrument of abdication, relinquishing her crown to her infant son James. Her signature was a shaky scrawl, a testament to her inner turmoil. In that moment, Mary Stuart ceased to be Queen of Scots, reduced to a mere shadow of her former self. Her son, barely a year old, became King James VI, with her half-brother, the Earl of Moray, appointed as regent. Moray, a stern and unyielding man, solidified his control over the kingdom, further marginalizing Mary and her supporters. But Mary was not one to surrender easily. Even in captivity, her spirit remained unbroken. She plotted, she schemed, she used her considerable charm to win over her jailers. She corresponded secretly with loyal supporters, weaving a web of intrigue that stretched across the kingdom. She waited for her opportunity, biding her time like a predator in the shadows. The opportunity came less than a year later. George Douglas, a young man sympathetic to Mary's plight, assisted her escape. On the 2nd of May 1568, while the castle guards were distracted by a May Day celebration, Mary slipped away from Loch Leven Castle, aided by a small boat that carried her across the loch to freedom. News of her escape spread like wildfire, igniting a spark of hope among her remaining loyalists. They flocked to her banner, eager to restore her to the throne. An army was raised, and once again, Mary found herself at the head of a force ready to challenge her enemies. The Earl of Moray, however, was prepared. He gathered his own troops, hardened veterans who had tasted victory before. The two armies clashed at the Battle of Langside, a small village just south of Glasgow. The battle was short and decisive. Mary's forces, though enthusiastic, were no match for the experience and discipline of Moray's troops. The battle quickly turned into a rout, with Mary's soldiers scattering in disarray. Mary herself watched in dismay as her hopes for regaining her throne were dashed once again. She knew that to remain in Scotland would mean certain capture and likely execution. Desperate and defeated, she made a fateful decision. On the 16th of May 1568, Mary crossed the Solway Firth into England, seeking refuge and protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. She arrived at Workington in Cumberland, exhausted and emotionally drained. She wrote a letter to Elizabeth, appealing to their shared kinship and pleading for assistance. She believed that Elizabeth, as a fellow queen, would understand her plight and offer her sanctuary. But Elizabeth viewed Mary with suspicion and distrust. She saw Mary not as a distressed relative, but as a potential rival, a claimant to the English throne. Mary's very existence posed a threat to Elizabeth's own legitimacy, and Elizabeth was not willing to take any chances. Instead of offering Mary the help she desperately needed, Elizabeth ordered her detained. Mary was taken into custody and placed under guard, beginning a long and agonizing captivity that would last nearly 2 decades. The arrival of Mary in England marked the beginning of a new chapter in her tumultuous life, a chapter defined by imprisonment, political maneuvering, and ultimately tragedy. While Mary hoped for sanctuary, she instead found herself a pawn in the complex game of European politics, her fate hanging precariously in the balance. Elizabeth, ever cautious and calculating, saw Mary as a valuable asset, a bargaining chip to be used in her dealings with Scotland, France, and Spain. Mary was initially housed in Carlisle Castle under the watchful eye of Sir Francis Knollys. Elizabeth sent letters, expressing sympathy but making no commitment to restore Mary to her throne. The English Queen established a commission to investigate the circumstances surrounding Darnley's death and Mary's subsequent actions. This commission convened in York, and later moved to Westminster, where it became clear that Elizabeth intended to use the investigation to damage Mary's reputation and justify her continued detention. The investigation dragged on for months, with accusations and counter-accusations flying between Mary's representatives and the Scottish regents. The infamous casket letters, purportedly written by Mary to Bothwell and containing incriminating evidence of her involvement in Darnley's murder, were presented as evidence against her. Mary vehemently denied their authenticity, claiming they were forgeries planted by her enemies. The letters remain a subject of historical debate to this day. Regardless of the truth, the investigation served Elizabeth's purpose. It kept Mary in a state of uncertainty and undermined her support both in Scotland and abroad. Elizabeth refused to make a definitive judgment on Mary's guilt or innocence, preferring to keep her imprisoned indefinitely, a constant threat looming over Scotland and a potential flashpoint for rebellion in England. Mary's captivity was not a continuous period of hardship. At times she was treated with relative comfort, allowed to maintain a small court and receive visitors. She engaged in needlework, read books, and corresponded with her allies in Europe. But always she was under guard, her movements restricted, her communications monitored. She was moved from one castle to another, each location more isolated and secure than the last. She resided for a time at Bolton Castle, where she enjoyed relative freedom, hunting and riding within a limited area. Later, she was moved to Tutbury Castle, a damp and unhealthy place that exacerbated her health problems. Her health deteriorated over the years, plagued by rheumatism, digestive issues, and bouts of depression. Despite her physical ailments, her spirit remained resilient. She continued to plot and scheme, hoping to escape her captivity and reclaim her throne. Numerous plots were hatched to rescue Mary, some with the backing of foreign powers like Spain and France, others initiated by zealous English Catholics, who saw Mary as the rightful Queen of England. These plots invariably failed, often betrayed by double agents working for Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham. Walsingham's network of spies was legendary, capable of infiltrating the most secret conspiracies and uncovering even the most carefully laid plans. One of the most significant plots was the Babington plot, uncovered in 1586. This plot involved Anthony Babington, a young Catholic nobleman who planned to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. Walsingham's agents intercepted Babington's letters to Mary, which appeared to implicate her directly in the assassination plot. These letters were used as evidence against Mary at her trial. Mary was put on trial for treason in October 1586 at Fotheringhay Castle. She defended herself with eloquence and passion, denying any involvement in the Babington plot and questioning the legitimacy of the court. She argued that as a foreign queen, she was not subject to English law. But the court found her guilty of treason and sentenced her to death. Elizabeth hesitated to sign Mary's death warrant. She was reluctant to execute a fellow queen, fearing the repercussions both at home and abroad. She also feared setting a precedent that could be used against her own person. For months she vacillated, torn between her political pragmatism and her personal reservations. Finally, under pressure from her advisors and Parliament, Elizabeth signed the death warrant on February 1, 1587. She immediately claimed that the warrant had been dispatched without her knowledge or consent, attempting to distance herself from the execution. Mary Queen of Scots was executed at Fotheringhay Castle on February 8, 1587. She faced her death with courage and dignity, maintaining her innocence to the end. She was dressed in black velvet with a white veil over her head. She walked calmly to the scaffold, where she was attended by 2 executioners. Before placing her head on the block, Mary prayed for her son, for the Catholic Church, and for England. She forgave her enemies and declared her faith in God. The executioner raised his axe, and with 2 swift blows, Mary Queen of Scots was dead. Her body was embalmed and buried in Peterborough Cathedral. Later, her son, James VI of Scotland, who had also become James I of England upon Elizabeth's death, had her remains moved to Westminster Abbey, where she was buried in a tomb opposite that of Elizabeth. Mary's execution sent shockwaves throughout Europe. Catholic powers were outraged, and Spain, already planning an invasion of England, used Mary's death as a justification for its actions. The Spanish Armada, launched in 1588, was intended to overthrow Elizabeth and restore Catholicism to England. The defeat of the Spanish Armada secured Elizabeth's throne and cemented England's position as a major European power. However, Mary's legacy lived on. Her story continued to fascinate and inspire, and she became a symbol of Catholic resistance and Scottish nationalism. The question of Mary's involvement in Darnley's murder remains a subject of debate among historians. Some believe she was innocent, a victim of circumstance and political intrigue. Others believe she was complicit, driven by ambition and a desire for revenge. The truth may never be known for certain. Mary Queen of Scots was a complex and controversial figure, a woman of great beauty, intelligence, and ambition, who lived a life of extraordinary drama and ultimately met a tragic end. Her story continues to resonate centuries later, a testament to the enduring power of myth and the enduring fascination with the lives of queens. She died a queen, though without a kingdom, in the land of her most persistent rival. No words followed.